There are moments in war that split history right down the middle. If you ever speak to a Luftwaffe pilot who flew against the Americans, it does not take long before a half-whispered phrase emerges: Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. Yet it never started this way. In 1942, rumors fluttered through the beer halls and briefing rooms of occupied France. The German pilots had a different name for what they would soon fear: the strange double-tailed bird, a komische Vogel. For battle-tested eyes of aces from wings like JG-26, players in the deadly dance of the Focke-Wulf 190 and B-109, the newcomers from Lockheed appeared almost comical, a cartoon, an improbable twist that somehow ended up in combat. With 2 engines and 2 slim booms, a pilot tucked away between propellers and a gun pod swelling in the nose, the Lightning was peculiar enough to draw grins instead of gasps. Karl Heinz, a veteran who later survived the war, recalled those days, saying, "The first time I saw one, I thought, who would fly such a thing? Is it a joke? It looked like a child's drawing of a plane. We didn't take it seriously, at first."
Across the English Channel, American ground crews, pilots, and designers had an altogether different relationship with the Lightning. The P-38 was never a joke. It was a radical answer to a 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps challenge, an interceptor able to reach 400 miles per hour and 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. The Lockheed team drafted something no one dared: a central pod for cockpit and guns, 2 mighty Allison V-12s supercharged to thunder, and a profile so unorthodox it would change aerial combat. Technical blueprints became reality as engineers worked late into the California evenings, every risk and every gamble a step into the unknown. Tony LaVere, an early test pilot, later admitted, everybody mocked her, called her the twin fuselage widowmaker. But when she took flight, nothing could touch her. Pilots lined up begging for a chance to race her down the runway. The Lightning was audacious, sometimes too much to handle for its own crews. It promised a climb rate that could challenge the Eagles at their highest, a top speed well beyond the best Messerschmitts, but there was more, a secret weapon set in the nose. Where other Allied fighters spread their guns across the wings, the P-38 Lightning gathered her firepower in a single concentrated fury: 4 50-caliber Brownings and a heart-stopping 20-millimeter cannon, all firing true, straight along the line of the eyes. With this setup, American pilots no longer needed to worry about convergence or spread. One squeeze, and a stream of lead would tear through the air with frightening accuracy.
Still, speed and firepower are only as strong as the story they carry. For the Lightning, the first chapters were filled with breakdowns and questions. Fast, yes, but mechanical complexity bred trouble. Supercharger failures, stubborn controls in the freezing British winters, ground crews who wrestled with the quirks of a temperamental machine built a world away from the muddy European airfields. Across Dieppe and North Africa, doubt crept among GIs and officers. Some in the first fighter group started to grumble that maybe the Krauts are right. She's just too much plane for the war we're fighting. Engines screamed for high-octane fuel that sometimes failed in supply. Pilots, rookies and veterans alike, spent restless nights poring over technical manuals, the moon's cold glow trickling through barracks windows as they tried to guess if tomorrow's mission would end in glory or disaster. Yet the Lightning repaid every ounce of devotion with moments no other aircraft could offer. In North Africa, as Eisenhower's armies fought to hold the bitter front line, stories began circulating of a red-nosed Lightning flying so fast above Kasserine Pass that German soldiers mistook it for a new American bomber. Aces like Mark Gabreski and Robin Olds learned to coax miracles from what airmen soon called the fork-tailed devil. In later years, Robin would write in his memoir, "Flying the Lightning was like holding on to the tail of a comet and praying you didn't let go." Over the Mediterranean and the mountains of Tunisia, tales grew, half-truth, half-boast, of Lightning's outclimbing Messerschmitts, plunging into dives so steep their wings threatened to rip free, only to recover and streak toward the clouds, escaping all pursuit.
Back amongst the Luftwaffe, the mood was shifting. No longer just a curiosity, the Lightning was leaving holes in German statistics and pride. Pilots watched, puzzled, as the P-38 could outclimb, outpace, and, in some cases, outfight their own trusted machines. In early 1943, over the skies of Tunisia, a lone Lightning reportedly destroyed 4 Junkers Ju-87s in 5 minutes, outturned 2 109s, and was gone before anyone could adjust. The German official reports labeled it American luck. But soon, luck grew dangerous. The laughter faded. In briefing tents and strategy meetings, aces passed warnings. Don't let the twin-boomed plane get on your tail. Don't fly straight when you see its unique form closing in. Slowly, almost silently, a new nickname slipped through the ranks and stuck. Der Gabelswansteufel, they whispered. The fork-tailed devil. No longer a strange bird, the Lightning was growing into the war's most surprising nightmare. And thus begins the saga, the story of a warbird that turned laughter into fear, improbability into legend, and gave birth to a reputation that no amount of skepticism could shake free.
The legend of the fork-tailed devil did not form overnight. It was forged across blazing battlefields, from the icy reaches of the Channel to the baking sands of North Africa. By early 1943, the P-38 had begun its true metamorphosis, from outlandish novelty into a nightmare for those who flew against it. It was the dogfights above Tunisia, Naples, and Pantelleria that truly set the stage. In these harsh skies, every side discovered what the Lightning could and could not do. For Luftwaffe aces, the encounters were humbling. They remembered how, at first, the Lightning's unusual silhouette almost begged them for an attack. Yet soon came a string of humiliation and loss. Pilots like Ernst, a young German ace, recalled the first clash. "We'd heard rumors. The Americans were flying something strange, high above the clouds, faster than anything we'd known. I saw it at sunrise, shining silver, chasing a U-87. I never believed it could outturn a 109, but I watched it peel away, climb, then dive like the devil itself." Reports grew in frequency. Lightnings appearing out of nowhere, striking and vanishing before the ground crews could even finish a cup of bitter coffee. Luftwaffe tactics began to shift. Briefings emphasized caution. Do not underestimate the twin-boomed Lightning. Engage only with altitude advantage. Never let it behind you.
Meanwhile, on the American side, P-38 pilots were discovering that every battle was a brutal test. The Lightning was fast, but tricky. At high speeds and low altitudes, controls remained heavy. Yet, when they operated above 20,000 feet, the airplane became something else, a tool for hunting, not just surviving. Technical improvements trickled in. Superchargers were tweaked, gun sights calibrated. In strategic raids over Italy and the Mediterranean, the Lightning found its sweet spot: long-range escort. Now, B-17 bombers were not alone. The first major air duels between P-38s and Luftwaffe fighters became legendary tales. Above Cap Bon, Tunisia, in April 1943, American pilot William Dixie Sloan led a formation of Lightnings on an intercept mission. The Germans anticipated an easy victory, Instead, Sloan's squadron pounced with dazzling speed, downing multiple enemy aircraft in minutes while losing few of their own. Axis radio reports marveled at the fork-tailed devil's sudden appearance and unmatched firepower. From the ground, Allied troops watched swooping contrails and twisting dogfights, often catching only glimpses of the strange twin-boomed planes that had begun to turn the tide. Even skeptical generals grew convinced, with the lightning in the sky, the odds were shifting. Meanwhile, on the American side, P-38 pilots were discovering that every battle was a brutal test. The Lightning was fast, but tricky. At high speeds and low altitudes, controls remained heavy. Yet, when they operated above 20,000 feet, the airplane became something else, a tool for hunting, not just surviving. Technical improvements trickled in. Superchargers were tweaked, gun sights calibrated. In strategic raids over Italy and the Mediterranean, the Lightning found its sweet spot: long-range escort. Now, B-17 bombers were not alone. The first major air duels between P-38's and Luftwaffe fighters became legendary tales. Above Cap Bon, Tunisia, in April 1943, American pilot William Dixie Sloan led a formation of Lightnings on an intercept mission. The Germans anticipated an easy victory. Instead, Sloan's squadron pounced with dazzling speed, downing multiple enemy aircraft in minutes while losing few of their own. Axis radio reports marveled at the fork-tailed devil's sudden appearance and unmatched firepower. From the ground, Allied troops watched swooping contrails and twisting dogfights, often catching only glimpses of the strange twin-boomed planes that had begun to turn the tide. Even skeptical generals grew convinced, with the lightning in the sky, the odds were shifting.
Battle after battle, the P-38's reputation soared. It was not invincible. Heat in the cockpit could melt butter, and structural vibrations threatened disaster if pushed beyond limits. Yet, as stories spread of Lightning surviving impossible odds, pilots were turning with wings riddled, engines coughing, yet somehow making it home, the myth became memory. There was a morning above Sicily that entered legend. A group of Lightnings arrived ahead of their bomber charges, disrupting a planned ambush by veteran Mech 109 pilots. The Germans had planned a classic bounce, but found themselves outmaneuvered. One German ace remembered years later that day. "We watched the forked tails turn against the sun. I dove, sure I had him. Suddenly he disappeared, and my wingman began shouting. Before I turned, he was gone." In the ready rooms afterwards, young Luftwaffe pilots could not help but gossip about the invisible approach and how the American machine seemed to twist fate itself. It was then the new nickname spread beyond frontline squadrons. The fork-tailed devil was no longer a joke, it was a warning. For American pilots, there was pride coupled with the reality of loss. The P-38 took as much as it gave. Malfunctions, high-stress flights, and unlucky matches claimed planes and friends alike. But for those who survived combat, each mission built confidence, camaraderie, and a deep respect for the airplane beneath them. As the P-38's legend grew, so did the efforts to improve her in every way. The ground crews became heroes in their own right, patching bullet wounds with tape, balancing fuel loads for desperate landings, struggling through mud and heat to get their planes off the ground. Some evenings, when the barracks grew quiet, old hands would paint small devils on the nose cones of their Lightnings, half in pride, half in memory of the men who never flew home. In war, tides turn fast. By summer 1943, Luftwaffe pilots were no longer looking for easy prey. Each encounter with a Lightning was unpredictable, costly, and often ended in a scramble for escape rather than glory. The Americans, never perfect, now possessed an edge, a machine that, despite every flaw and every brush with disaster, kept coming back stronger. The story of the P-38 had only just begun.
As the war rolled into late 1943, the reputation of the P-38 Lightning was already evolving. What began as ridicule in the Luftwaffe's ready rooms had transformed, bit by bit, into apprehension, then dread. This change was not born from rumor, but from the mounting, undeniable evidence of wrecked fighters and shaken survivors returning to base with tales of close escapes. It was above the jagged mountains of Italy that the Lightning's ascendance crystallized. American operations were intensifying, and the need for long-range fighter escorts had grown acute. The Mustang was still in its infancy. Meanwhile, the P-38 was the only Allied fighter that could escort bombers deep into enemy territory. The loss rates faced by unescorted bombers were no secret. Every additional Lightning in the sky meant more young men stood a fighting chance to make it home. On the ground, engineers worked tirelessly, solving problems one by one. They replaced turbo superchargers, adjusted cooling, and refined the oxygen systems for high-altitude flight. Every technical improvement translated directly into greater dominance in the air. Stories multiplied, a single Lightning taking on 3 Messerschmitts, a flight of P-38's intercepting enemy transport squadrons, or squadrons of the 82nd Fighter Group slashing through enemy lines and returning home with little more than bullet scars on their paint. The Luftwaffe's established tactics, bounce attacks, frontal assaults, coordinated ambushes, were yielding fewer victories. Suddenly, escaping from a P-38's guns was nearly impossible. The plane maintained speed, climbed higher, and often fired first. Among German fighters, a new caution pervaded. Pilots began to talk of the Lightning as if it were an animal, unpredictable, fast, and dangerous. Experienced aces adapted, maneuvering carefully to avoid giving a Lightning too much sky. But rookie pilots often didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. One former Luftwaffe ace, reminiscing years later, described a fateful sortie. "We underestimated them. I saw the twin booms and remembered my training. Attack from above, never let it get behind you. But before I could turn, I heard the rattle of its guns. My wingman vanished in smoke. The Americans called it luck, but we knew better. It was skill and something else, something in how their planes moved with the sky." Within the American squadrons, pilots built rituals of respect around the Lightning. Before every mission, ground crews would rub a thumb against the painted devil emblem on the nose cone and wish their pilots good hunting. Letters home described not just victories, but close calls. Wings riddled, control stiff, but always the feeling that the Lightning somehow wanted to come home as much as its crew. The press caught on. Newspapers published heroic tales, and though some stories were exaggerated for morale, many were ruthlessly real. Photographs of P-38s with patched bullet holes and battle-scarred noses became symbols of tenacity and innovation. Children in America drew fork-tailed silhouettes in their notebooks, daydreaming of wild chases above the clouds. What made the Lightning so difficult for the Luftwaffe to handle, more than tactics or technology, was its dual personality. It could fight at high altitude and escape trouble with astonishing climb rates. It could pounce with a burst of concentrated firepower, then vanish into the haze before the enemy regrouped. The twin engines made it uniquely survivable. Even if one was hit, the other often could carry the plane and its pilot clear of danger. Yet the Lightning was not perfect. Pilots wrestled with the risks of compressibility, a sudden loss of control if the nose dropped in a steep dive, and some paid with their lives as they learned the limits of their aircraft. North African heat and European cold demanded endless adaptation. Still, every adversity was met with solutions. Every loss spurred lessons for those who flew next. It was during this phase that one young American pilot, after a brutal dogfight, sat among his crew and remarked, "They used to laugh at us. Now, every time we come home, I feel like we're bringing back a little extra terror for the next fight." On both sides of the conflict, the myth grew. Fork-tailed devil, no longer just a name, but a warning scribbled in the margins of Luftwaffe briefing notes. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary. Stay alert in the clouds, and above all, never underestimate the strangeness of a new idea, because sometimes the war is won by something no one saw coming. The chapters of the P-38's legend were still being written, but one thing was clear: the days of laughter were gone. In their place, a new respect and fear had taken root all across the war-torn skies of Europe and the Mediterranean.
Victory, as any veteran will tell you, is never the result of a single battle. For the P-38 Lightning, its rise to power was as much a story of engineering evolution as it was of courage and adaptation in the cockpit. As 1944 dawned, the Lightning's form and function continued to sharpen. American tacticians demanded more: greater range, better handling, robust systems for transcontinental missions. Each new model incorporated painstaking feedback. Pilots reported issues, factory floors responded. Ventral covers were reinforced, coolants improved, propellers tuned for quicker climbs and savage dives. Air crews marveled at how mechanics, sometimes in mud and wind, could strip and reassemble a Lightning before dawn. The Mediterranean and Italian campaigns saw the Lightning's legend ignite. In the hands of skilled pilots, the P-38 became a wolf among lambs. Already, its silhouette was feared above the Po Valley and the beaches of Anzio. Escort missions for bombers cemented its endurance. Where Mustangs still struggled to reach every target, the Lightning could fly the long haul and fight at the finish. Convoys, supply depots, and even elite German fighter groups found themselves hunted by a plane they once mocked. Some aces, names now etched into the memory of air raid sirens and diaries, earned their stripes from the Lightning's controls. Men like Thomas McGuire and Richard Bong, among the highest-scoring American fighter aces in history, carved their legend in the Pacific and over Italy, exploiting the twin booms for boom and zoom tactics. They would climb to impossible heights, pick targets, dive with lethal velocity, and vanish before enemy gunners realized their fate.
Richard Bong's exploits became myth. 28 aerial victories, the Medal of Honor, and a reputation for both reckless bravery and stubborn humility. Even among American pilots, tales of Bong's Lightning weaving through flak and enemy fighters brought equal parts amusement and admiration. But it was not just brute strength that made the Lightning an ace maker. The plane rewarded subtlety. Pilots with sharp instincts and cool nerves learned to use the twin engines for asymmetric thrust, attacking aggressively, then spinning away or banking steeply when a Messerschmitt closed in. Losses still occurred. War is never kind. But for every downed Lightning, 5 returned, engines coughing, adrenaline high. Luftwaffe tactics adapted, but rarely surpassed the Lightning's gifts. In the ready tents, German pilots studied blueprints and interrogation reports, hoping to find weaknesses. Some believed the Lightning was cursed by fate. How else could an enemy airplane appear so suddenly, do so much damage, and escape into gathering weather before retaliation could even begin? Sometimes, Allied ground forces caught glimpses of these battles from below. Infantrymen across the Italian front wrote home about the silver devils streaking above, leaving trails of black smoke, the distant chatter of guns echoing over the valley. For civilians, sudden rows of twin-boom shadows overhead were both terror and salvation. The promise of protection, the fear that battle might spill downward at any moment. Within the American squadrons, camaraderie hardened. Lightning units prided themselves on their distinctiveness, a mixture of aggression, technical know-how, and the unspoken burden of flying a beast that sometimes bit its own master. Pilots exchanged stories by campfire, passed down tips for handling compressibility, and paid tribute to those lost to engine fires or enemy cannon. One squadron commander once wrote in his journal, "The Lightning is faster than fear, and twice as stubborn as hope. Every time we land, I tell my crew, trust her and she'll trust you in return." But if the plane itself was growing into a legend, it was only because of the men who flew, fought, and sometimes died in her embrace. For them, the sky was both battlefield and proving ground, a place where laughter turned to respect, doubt to certainty, and ordinary young men, American, British, or sometimes even German, became something extraordinary. Through relentless innovation, relentless danger, and relentless courage, the fork-tailed devil became not just a terror in the clouds, it became the shape of history itself.
Among all chapters in the Lightning's wartime saga, few stand out like Operation Vengeance. It was the spring of 1943, and the Pacific skies saw the kind of mission that would rewrite the manual of aerial warfare. Though the European theater continued to test the Lightning's strength, it was over the jungles and islands of the Far East that the twin-boomed shadow struck pure terror. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was touring the Solomon Islands in a sleek Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, flanked by fighters. The Americans intercepted and decrypted his itinerary, a feat of intelligence daring. But what followed was nothing short of extraordinary. The mission to intercept and eliminate Yamamoto hinged on range, speed, and surprise, precisely what the Lightning could provide. A squadron of P-38's, operating at the outermost edge of their endurance, streaked over ocean and jungle, hugging altitudes, navigating without radio chatter, guided by the ticking promise of revenge. Near Bougainville, they spotted the tri-lobed formation. Their leader signaled, diving into history. Within seconds, the fork-tailed devils burst into myth. In a blistering attack, Yamamoto's bomber and escort plunged flaming to the jungle below. The Americans had achieved the impossible. A long-range interception at a distance where no other Allied fighter could compete. A strike so surgical, Japan's high command was plunged into disbelief and mourning. Newspapers around the world ran headlines, "Lightning delivers vengeance," and airmen everywhere felt the surge of pride that comes from the impossible made real.
In the Mediterranean, echoes of Operation Vengeance inspired new tactics. Commanders realized the Lightning could project power across entire regions. Escort missions extended deeper into Axis territory, bombers flew with confidence, and enemy squadrons scrambled just to keep pace. The Luftwaffe, once dismissive, now recognized Lightning wings as high-value targets. The legend only deepened. Fork-tailed devils weren't just fearsome, they were everywhere. But with victory came grief and responsibility. Long-range missions demanded endurance. Pilots faced navigation errors, fuel shortages, and the ever-present threat of enemy interception. Stories of miraculous survival, pilots landing on fumes, navigating by starlight, circulated through the ranks, reminders that technology alone could not win a war. Only the combination of machine and man, of courage and calculation, could tip the scales. The Lightning's versatility became its hallmark. Reconnaissance models snapped the first photographs over Normandy.
Fighter-bomber variants delivered devastating strikes against supply convoys in France and Italy. As Allied armies pressed further into Europe, P-38 squadrons adapted daily, inventing new maneuvers, sharing hard-earned lessons in sweaty tent briefings and hurried hand signals on muddy airfields. Yet the personal stories gave the Lightning its deepest heartbeat. Veteran pilots recounted the tension of waiting for dawn, the mix of fear and thrill as engines roared to life. Some remembered tracing the lines of fork tails in the dust, hoping for luck, missing friends, and dreaming of victory. Ground crew worked miracles, patching holes, bending metal, restoring wounded machines so that their crews might fly again. From every angle, the Lightning's legend expanded as a force multiplier, extending the fist of Allied might while pushing the boundaries of what aviation could achieve. For Axis tacticians, the sky was no longer simply blue, it was haunted by a shape as lethal as it was unforgettable. Through Operation Vengeance and the campaigns that followed, the fork-tailed devil became more than a weapon, more than a name. It was the relentless symbol of Allied intent, the determination to fight across oceans, to answer every deep cut with unyielding resolve. The war pressed on, the Lightning followed every front, casting shadows where there once was laughter and leaving in its wake a new calculation. Survival depended on respect, not only for foe, but for the twin-boomed devil, whose arrival meant change was coming.
There is a saying among fighter pilots: battles are won not only by firepower and maneuver, but by the minds of those who dared to fly. The P-38 Lightning's influence stretched far beyond its twin engines and gun pods. It altered the very psychology of air combat. Luftwaffe pilots, seasoned and green alike, began to feel the shiver every time a twin-boomed shadow flickered across the sky. No longer was the Lightning an object of mockery, it had become an omen of danger. Veteran German flyers found themselves second-guessing attacks or retracing escape routes in the hope of shaking the relentless pursuit of the fork-tailed devil. Some Luftwaffe commanders tried to keep morale high, focusing briefings on tactics and drills, yet rumors slipped through. Stories of dogfights where Lightnings appeared out of nowhere, outturned their adversaries, and escaped unscathed. The more they fought, the more respect and sometimes fear took root in their squadrons. Allied air bases, meanwhile, became microcosms of hope and anxiety. Life for Lightning crews was intense, a blend of camaraderie and near-permanent tension. Pilots woke before dawn, strapped on flight suits, checked Lucky Charms stitched into pockets, then headed for pre-mission briefings, where each map and marker could mean the difference between return and oblivion. Between missions, flyers traded stories with mechanics and ground personnel. Tales of miraculous escapes from flak, damaged controls coaxed home with raw skill, and guidance by the stars when instruments failed. In these moments, the Lightning was more than a plane. It was a lifeline, a talisman against the chaos beyond the airfield's edge. There were also nights of loss. The empty bunks in every barracks, letters to families that were never answered, reminders in every patch on a battered fuselage. Pilots wrote in their diaries about fear, admitting how every flight meant wrestling with mortality. Some sought solace in rituals, a thumb run across the devil's insignia for luck, a silent prayer before takeoff, a steadying handshake or slap on the back for a friend heading into danger.
As the months passed, the Lightning's psychological impact spread. In some units, new pilots arrived with a mixture of awe and terror, wanting to master the ace-maker, yet dreading the learning curve that claimed so many before them. In others, a quiet pride grew. Surviving the Lightning's demands meant not just flying, but becoming part of a legacy that spanned continents and fronts. On the battlefield, psychological warfare took many forms. Single Lightnings would break enemy formations by attacking with speed and confidence, banking away at the last moment to avoid counterattack. Enemy pilots often fired wildly, missing opportunities as anxiety and surprise overtook discipline. For some Germans, the mere sight of twin booms meant aborting an attack altogether. We all learned to listen for the sound, a double howl different from anything else in the sky. Remembered one Luftwaffe pilot long after the war? It came fast, hit hard, and vanished. Sometimes I looked over my shoulder and wondered if I really saw it or just feared I had. At home, newsreels and magazines amplified the Lightning's reputation. Photographs of returning aces, interviews with grateful bomber crews, and technical essays about the plane's unique design solidified its place in the public imagination. Civilians watched films about daring missions and wrote letters of encouragement, knowing every victory was hard-won, every survival uncertain. All the while, the Lightning's greatest contribution was as a force that shaped both sides' understanding of what was possible. It taught that horror could be channeled into respect, that fear could drive bravery, and that sometimes the mere idea of an indomitable opponent could reshape a battlefield without a single shot fired. In this way, the Lightning's shadow, both literal and figurative, helped tilt the scales of the air war. The fork-tailed devil haunted the dreams of those who faced it and uplifted the hopes of those who flew it. And as the Allied advance pressed deeper, this psychological edge made every mission more than a contest of machines. It became a trial of nerve, determination, and the will to survive.
With each passing campaign, the Lightning's reputation became more than just legend. Above the rolling fields of France, Italy's winding valleys, and the scattered islands of the Pacific, the fork-tailed devil clarified its role, not only as a hunter, but as a lifeline for embattled ground forces. In tactical operations, P-38's racked up astounding victories. Entire bomber formations owed their survival to aggressive Lightning escorts darting ahead or spiraling through enemy fighters in the nick of time. Pilots relished the moments when their intervention saved hundreds of lives. Every burst from their concentrated gun array, a stitch in the broader tapestry of Allied hope. Some missions became the stuff of myth. In late 1944, during a desperate interception over the Ardennes, a handful of Lightnings caught a squadron of FW-190s prepping for a surprise attack. The Americans, outnumbered and at a disadvantage, pounced with uncanny coordination. Minutes later, they returned battered but victorious, having scattered their foes and forced a critical retreat. For those on the ground, the Lightning's arrival signaled reprieve. Infantrymen pinned down by enemy fire cheered the sight of twin booms overhead. They knew that help was coming. Bridges, supply columns, and armored units found themselves protected or avenged through the Lightning's swift punishing strikes. Yet the price remained high. The nature of combat demanded everything from its participants. In bitter weather and over enemy territory, pilots reported engine fires, hydraulic failures, mid-air collisions, the myriad crises that defined every harrowing sortie. Some barely made it home, coasting on a single engine, bloodied but unbowed. Ground crews who waited by the runways learned to read every incoming silhouette, praying for miracles each time a Lightning appeared with a limp or a trail of smoke. Desperate escapes gave birth to countless tales. One pilot, recalled later by his squadron mates, managed to evade 3 pursuers by diving into a thick cloud bank, spiraling downward and staying just ahead of disaster for nearly 30 miles. His Lightning was riddled, his nerves frayed, But he later wrote, "I trusted her, and she trusted me. Out there, it was just the two of us and the enemy. Nothing else mattered but the next minute of survival." For many, the Lightning became a metaphor. Indomitable, unpredictable, sometimes forgiving, but never merciful. It rewarded innovation in its handlers and punished carelessness. Squadron leaders took care to cultivate an ethos of adaptability, drilling their pilots in emergency procedures and tactical ingenuity. Meanwhile, Axis reports chronicled a mounting sense of desperation. German ace Otto, who survived the war, described how he watched his comrades fall to lightning attacks week after week. He observed, "Some days you could sense that victory was slipping away. The Americans came from everywhere, and their fork-tailed fighters seemed to multiply in the sky. You learned to respect it, and even fear it, because you didn't know which direction the next attack would come from." The balance was shifting. Lightning pilots grew confident, but remained humble, always aware that the sky held unforgiving surprises. They mourned every loss, celebrated each return, and never forgot that the next mission could be their last. In the final analysis, the Lightning was more than just an aircraft. It was the embodiment of a fighting spirit, restless, resilient, and relentless. Its darkest hour was its finest hour. Every victory hard won, every survival a testament to the alliance of man and machine. As the Allies pushed toward final victory, the fork-tailed devil symbolized triumph through adversity. A beacon, lighting up the front lines, and, for those who lived to tell the tale, a memory that would endure long after the guns fell silent.
From the endless skyways of the Pacific to the battered fields of Europe, the P-38 Lightning became the crucible in which legends were forged. The war produced dozens of Lightning aces, pilots whose names would echo through the annals of air combat for generations. Richard Bong, for instance, was a farm boy from Wisconsin who rose to be America's highest-scoring ace. Flying his beloved Lightning, Bong racked up 40 official aerial victories, each one a mix of nerves, daring, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Unlike the brash, lone wolf stereotype, Bong was known for his humility and meticulous preparation. Squadron mates recalled how he spent hours reviewing maps, weather, and bullet trajectories before every sortie. His favorite ritual was to kiss a photo of his sweetheart, taped to the instrument panel before each mission, a quiet promise that he intended to come home. Other aces followed, each with their own brand of bravery. Thomas McGuire flew with unshakable determination in the South Pacific skies, racking up 38 kills before his own final confrontation. Dominic Salvatore, Don Gentile, and Charles MacDonald led aggressive attacks in Europe, earning not only medals, but the admiration of their comrades and table talk among the enemy. For every ace, there were hundreds of Lightning pilots whose heroism might never make the headlines. They flew dangerous reconnaissance missions deep into enemy territory, bringing back priceless intelligence no camera or spy could hope to gather. Others acted as pathfinders for bomber streams over Germany, taking the brunt of flak and fighter attacks so that others might follow. Beyond their kills and victories, Lightning crews shaped the very nature of aerial warfare. Dogfighting tactics advanced rapidly. Pilots traded tips on using the engines for sudden turns or dives, how to manipulate throttle and prop for maximum escape speed, how to gauge the odds and choose when to fight or run. These lessons, jotted in logbooks and shared over mess hall coffee, became the unwritten doctrine for a new era of air combat. But the story of the Lightning was not just about victors. It was written in reunions, letters home, and the memories shared at post-war air meets. Pilots who had stared death in the face carried a lifelong bond, one forged by sweat, fear, and the humming magic of those twin engines that once roared them toward destiny. After the guns fell silent, thousands of Lightnings were scrapped or sold, but a handful found new homes with museums, air racers, and collectors who saw in their gleaming shapes the story of determination incarnate. Their surviving pilots became storytellers, invited to classrooms, honored at air shows, and interviewed by historians eager to preserve the tale of a machine that once changed the world. The Lightning's legend continued in popular culture. Post-war films, radio dramas, and novels brought its story to a new generation. Scale models graced the shelves of children's bedrooms, the distinctive forked tail appearing on posters and trading cards. Even into the jet age, the memory lingered, that of a time when speed, innovation, and raw courage could tip the balance of the whole world. As the Cold War began and fighter designs leapt forward, the lessons learned in the Lightning's cockpit were not forgotten. Many aces became test pilots or instructors, passing on the secrets of aerial dogfighting, the critical importance of teamwork, and the unshakable discipline that comes only from facing the unknown and surviving. Above all, the true legacy of the P-38 Lightning lived on in the spirit it inspired. For every pilot who gripped her yoke in fear and hope, for every mechanic who wiped sweat from his brow, bringing a wounded bird back to life, and for every ground crew, officer or civilian, who looked to the sky searching for those twin silver streaks, there was the knowledge that adversity could always be met and sometimes conquered with something bold, something new, and something forged in the fires of pure resolve. The forked-tailed devil, once mocked, forever respected. As World War II thundered toward its end, the Lightning faced its final act across continents brimming with both hope and devastation. D-Day had passed. The Allies now surged into France, Italy, and deep toward German heartland. The Pacific saw island-hopping campaigns, each step secured in part by Lightning squadrons that carried the flag farther than anyone thought possible. With every successful beachhead, every liberated city, the P-38 etched new chapters into both personal and collective memory. Lightning pilots formed the vanguard of aerial reconnaissance over Normandy's battered coast, and their fighter-bomber brethren blasted bridges to halt fleeing enemy columns. They stayed close to bombers, broke up last-ditch Luftwaffe attacks, and sometimes waged solitary battles, one fork-tailed shadow dancing through flak, the hope of 1,000 men below. The air bases, meanwhile, grew busier by the day. Lightning mechanics, now veterans themselves, patched old wounds and coaxed engines into last hurrahs. Even as news of armistice reached muddy tents and bustling hangars, a kind of electricity lingered. Pilots traded final souvenirs, scraps of painted nose art, lucky coins taped to throttles, and handwritten notes tucked into navigation charts. Victory was sweet, but never complete. For every celebration, there was an echo of loss, empty chairs at mess, names missing from the roster, and the haunting memory of missions that ended in fire and silence. Lightning pilots wrote home about triumph and sorrow, the delicate balance between survival and sacrifice that had shaped their journey.
Among these stories, some stand out. As Germany surrendered, a group of Lightnings made one last ceremonial flight over liberated Paris, a salute from the sky, twin booms framed against cathedral spires and fields still bearing scars of war. The ground crowds gazed up, seeing not just warplanes, but symbols of freedom hard-won. In the Pacific, final sorties chased scattered enemy resistance across blue horizons. Pilots who once faced overwhelming odds now soared with hard-earned assurance. Aces among clouds, each mission anchored by years of experience and a shared commitment to seeing their duty through to the very last day. With the war concluded, the Lightning, once a design too radical for acceptance, became an icon of what was possible when vision, teamwork, and courage joined forces. Countless Lightnings returned to bases across the U.S., England, and Australia. Most would be mothballed, melted, or sold to civilian operators. But a few found new assignments, mapping post-war Europe, chasing storm patterns, or setting speed records that would stand for decades. The peace was, as always, complicated. Pilots adjusted to civilian life, some haunted by sleepless nights, others driven by the urge to keep flying above a world now forever changed. Lightning veterans joined post-war military and aerial exploration. Some became teachers and mentors, gifting the hard-won lessons of war to a new generation of pilots and dreamers. For war historians, the legacy of the Lightning is preserved in archives and museum halls. Battered engine nacelles, faded photographs of distant missions, and stories recorded in interviews and memoirs. The fork-tailed silhouette remains a favorite among airshow enthusiasts and collectors, as vivid now as it was at the height of global conflict. Victory did not erase the scars, but it ensured that the courage and ingenuity of those who flew the Lightning would always be remembered. The final missions closed a chapter on wartime innovation, forever linking the twin-boomed fighter to the ideals of determination, resilience, and hope that defined the best of human achievement. The sky is quieter now, but every time a Lightning takes off for a ceremonial flight or restoration run, there's an echo of its last thunder. A reminder to everyone watching, both then and now, that what was once doubted, laughed at, and feared became, by the end, one of the greatest legends ever to pass through the clouds. The war's end did not silence the story of the Lightning. Instead, its echo continued all through the peace years, across decades and continents, wherever humans sought to fly faster, further, and bolder. In museums and memorials, children stood beside restored Lightnings, eyes wide. Veterans told their grandchildren how the devil with the forked tail changed everything. Old squadron patches and photographs held a power that no textbook could explain, the living link between the courage of youth and the wisdom of age. For those who had flown the Lightning, the lessons endured. Pilots brought that cockpit grit to new roles. Some became test pilots for jet projects. Others taught navigation and tactics to young airmen entering a new, uncertain age. Their advice shaped the doctrine of air forces worldwide. Be bold but prepared. Respect innovation. And, above all, never underestimate the value of teamwork under fire. A few surviving planes continued to fly, thrilling crowds at air shows from Oshkosh to Paris. The roar of their engines and the unmistakable twin shadow across the ground drew tears and cheers, reminders that history, when built on determination, cannot easily fade.
Writers and artists captured the Lightning saga in every medium: novels, documentaries, paintings, and songs. The stories told were not just of battles, but of unity and hardship, of how thousands of mechanics, planners, airmen, and families joined together to support a victory that once seemed impossible. But perhaps the greatest legacy was in memory. Pilots who survived would sometimes wake from dreams of icy clouds and roaring engines, hearts pounding, knowing that for a few precious minutes they had again been young, uncertain, and impossibly brave. The meaning endures for anyone who dares to dream or fight against the odds. The Lightning proved that skepticism can become awe, that mistakes can become mastery, and that the most unusual solutions can win the day. For every viewer and reader, its journey is a lesson about war, about invention, and about the unbreakable spirit with which we meet the unknown. So the next time you see that odd forked shadow, be it in the clouds, in an old photo, or even in the shape of a new idea, remember what it means. Once laughter filled the ready rooms, later fear and respect, and finally admiration lasting lifetimes. The fork-tailed devil flew not just for victory, but for something deeper, the promise that courage, when paired with vision, can fly farther than anyone ever believed.